So we've arrived in Nagasaki on what is a pretty cold morning, and got here by train. It was about an hour from Hiroshima, actually 2 hours. Mark, you've been reading up on this on the train. Can you tell us a bit about where we're standing and why we're between two significant sites for the city?
Here is the memorial to the Hypocentre,
right,
which is the area immediately below where the bomb goes off. And over here is a very fascinating ruin of Urukami Cathedral.
The Catholic Cathedral.
The Catholic Cathedral. Nagasaki, as maybe Ed can tell us a bit more about, was home to what Japan's largest Catholic community.
Well, I mean, as I was saying earlier, Kyushu historically was the sort of centre of Christianity in Japan, and 300 years ago, some historians estimate a fifth of the population, roughly, of Kyushu may have been Christian, Catholic, in other words. And then most of these Catholics were massacred, but quite a number went underground. And so for 250 years, there was an underground Catholic community in Japan, which then resurfaced in the early Meiji period when Christianity was legalized. And yes, Nagasaki was the city with the largest population of Christians, particularly Catholics. And this part of Nagasaki where we're standing now was where most of those Catholics lived. And so when the bomb was dropped, they dropped it not just on Nagasaki, which was the sort of most cosmopolitan city in Japan in some ways, but they dropped it particularly on the Catholic.
Which was not the intended location of the bomb.
I believe the intention was to bomb closer to the docks, but because slightly
cloudy,
I believe that
so the docks are down that way.
Fuel limits. So this is actually over quite a steep hill. Compared to the city, which meant that there wasn't as much destruction on the city because of the hills and the ways in which
it also meant that some of the older parts of the city, for example, the parts of the Chinatown, Glover Garden, which is a big tourist site, those parts weren't destroyed.
Okay.
It's a remarkable site.
So then that really kind of informs or even dictates forms of commemoration that happened afterwards.
Very much so. I mean, it is bound up with the Catholic identity of this area and also of this memorial, this ruin. So this is not actually the site on which the cathedral sat. This has been moved here into this commemorative park. And the story behind that is a very, very complicated one. And it's actually very fascinating in comparison with Hiroshima. For a long time, that ruin was, that segment was part of the ruins of the cathedral that was a tourist attraction. We were talking in Hiroshima about how quickly this kind of domestic tourism, people coming to see the site. In 1950, Nagasaki and the ruins of Urukami Castle are one of the top. Cathedral. I keep saying castle. Are one of the top tourist destinations in Japan, and very quickly,
even more so than Hiroshima.
Even more so, it seems, in Hiroshima, and partly I think that is perhaps that rather exotic combination of also having the Catholic community and maybe the interest of some Japanese in this different.
But that's a completely different story to the international attention that was given to the city.
Absolutely. So its history is you mean in terms of its longer history of internationalism?
No, post-war.
In post-war, right.
So you were saying here there was a move from American pressure to not have this being...
Well, the story is a very long one, but initially the municipal authorities from, I think, about 1949 have a committee that says we must preserve this, both as it being a commemorative space that symbolises another city of peace, eternal peace, but also because of its tourism, and a lot of survivors want this memorial, this ruin to stand, partly because in 1955 I think they do have a peace memorial which we may see a statue which looks quite militant, which is quite an embodiment of strength and physicality.
Which doesn't really speak to the sensibilities of the Catholic community.
Well, the Catholic community don't want this. A lot of them don't want this ruin.
Well,
they want a rebuilt cathedral.
They want a rebuilt cathedral, and there's a very, very various reasons for that. I mean, partly it's practical. You want a place of worship. But there's a move. So there's a move to sort of completely reconstruct the cathedral, which is eventually what happens in 1959. The key thing is the mayor of the time, who's behind preserving this ruin, changes his mind after a trip to the US in the mid-1950s, and then pushes from 1958 for the demolition of this site, the removal of this site, and it's reconstructed as a new cathedral, which is near the
He
original
changes
site.
his mind, or he has his mind changed?
Wow, that's the interesting thing. And a Japanese journalist a few years ago started to research this story. If you look at the Wikipedia entry, it's very clearly put, or the general history, that it's the community wanted this, a new church to be built, and a symbolic of rebirth, and also within the Christian context of it being necessary to their mission to go forward, and their redemptive mission to go forward.
Resurrection story.
And
A
this
resurrection
church,
story.
the cathedral itself was an incredibly important symbol for the Catholic community in Nagasaki and in Japan. I mean, when it was built, I think it was the largest, certainly the largest church in Japan. I think one of the largest, if not the largest, in Asia. Cathedral, and it was only finished, I think, in the 1920s.
That's right, 1895 it's begun. And then,
it took it, and the Catholic community literally sort of built it brick by brick, or stone by stone.
So you have this tension between non-Christian survivors wanting to maintain this memorial in the same way you have the A-bomb dome in Hiroshima, and Catholics in Nagasaki wanting to create a new space, and the municipal authorities suggesting some compromises, a new cathedral built next to this.
Moved into a...
Well, eventually this happens, but the interesting thing that, as I said, a Japanese journalist and a recent scholar have started to argue is the role of the US in pushing and pressuring and donating money for the new cathedral in order to get the old ruins erased and removed.
And that's US government, because this is also... Nagasaki has a number of twin cities around the world, including St. Paul's.
Yes, in Minnesota.
In Minnesota, so...
It's a complicated story, and I think the full details aren't there yet, but you have to consider the context. Hiroshima becomes, I think in 1955, is it, the center for the first Congress of anti-nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Right.
And then
World
there's
Congress
a World
for
Congress.
atoms and hydrogen and atomic peace, I think.
Yes, right. And then after that, there's a movement that developed out of that. The Bikini Atoll
testing
is 54. The H-bomb testing, and there's the Japanese fishing boat in which Japanese fishermen, one dies eventually from radiation, and there is this, at the same time, there is this within the Japanese government, this move towards nuclear energy, and the decision at the High that we're going to pursue this course. So within this context of Japanese-American relations, this notion of atomic peace we were talking before, it makes sense to not have not have a space that remembers the annihilation and the devastation. And the thing it's difficult from the US context that, in this new world of Protestant and other this Christian America, that you actually drop the bomb and at the center other Catholic Christians are annihilated.